welcome so much, all the panelists. Thank you so much for being with us. And it looks like we're having a problem of representation. Where are the men? Oh, a panel of all women, how nice! What a lovely thing to be moderating a panel of such extraordinary women. And I've heard about each of you, met some of you, and I really just want to delve into the stories. I know we have the bios online for everyone. So I'm just going to introduce names and companies so we can get down to business here, because we have a lot of important things to discuss here. So with that, I have with me Swazi Tshabalala, who is the Senior VP at the African Development Bank. And next to her, Rajakumari Jandhyala at Yatra Ventures, the founder and CEO, and Manal Abdelmonem, who is the Executive President of Sobek Group in Agriculture, and Patricia Poku-Diaby, CEO and founder of Plot Enterprise Group. And at the end of the panel, I have Asatu Ouedraogo, the Director General of Global Business Company. And so I'd like to really start with looking at how each of you got to where you are, especially on the financing end. But how did you know, we learn from experience and what everyone has done. So I'd like to just go down and just very quickly, because I know we have a lot of things to get to, so we'll go very quickly with things. But how did you get to where you are today? I know that's a long question, but a brief answer, especially in the financing part. How, you know, for you it's a little bit different because you're not getting financing, you're giving it, but how did you get to the point of being able to give financing?
So thank you very much, and it's such a privilege and an honor for me to be here. And let me thank Her Excellency for a fantastic and inspiring speech. This is what the AIF is about. The president at the beginning of this event said, let's do deals. So I am the Senior Vice President at the African Development Bank, and I came here via a very circuitous route, and I don't intend to go through all of it, but my background is in finance. I've always done it in banking, financing projects, investments. It's always been of interest to me. And interestingly, not because it was such a male-dominated industry. You can imagine in South Africa in 1992, you know, it wasn't just that there were no women, but there were no black people. So, you know, it's been a long, long journey, but worth it to be here today.
The double challenge.
That's it.
Yes. Thank you so much. Raja, I know, Raja and I know each other in Washington, and we have talked so many times about the incredible route that you took for financing. But if you could just briefly tell us about that.
Good morning, good afternoon. I'm in a different country every day. Thank you, everyone. And most of all, I would like to thank the Madam President who spoke today, because every generation needs, women needs people who inspire them. And I've been inspired by so many women that have come before me. And so I always feel personal journeys are part of a longer history. I might have been the 7th woman that showed up, or I might have been the 50th woman that showed up asking for money. So I feel like we inherit history and we bequeath history. So here today, I'm hoping to support the requirements. This company, Yatra Ventures, was set up after almost 25 years in the public sector, and realizing that the continent was shifting away from certain countries were aspiring to be middle-income country. And that kind of sparked my interest to say, all right, if the vision is that, how do we play a role as a company in supporting that vision become a reality? So our company, Yatra, is focused on countries who have determined to be on path of middle income, and we are supporting infrastructure in all sectors: agriculture infrastructure, energy infrastructure, financial infrastructure. And one thing that we require in the company is, if you want to work with us, either as a service provider or an advisor, or provide debt and equity capital to the projects we're developing, we hope to see women in your organizations as well.
Thank you. Mano, if you could tell us very briefly how you ended up getting financing.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me to the panel. It's a very important topic. Thank you very much, Your Excellency. It was a very inspiring and powerful message, because especially that I know very well and I admire your country and the women there. Women are, again, the backbone, as you said, and we're very shy to demonstrate how strong we can be, the strength for family, for society, for even institution. To answer your question, how I get to there, it's not an easy path. Of course, I've changed from, first started my journey with trading, because trading was the thing to know how to do things. Then gradually we shifted to the agriculture itself, chain of agriculture. So we are in the agriculture investment, agriculture, smart agriculture with its technology, and the industrialization. We have made processing of different crops in different areas, focusing definitely in Africa and part of it in India. When I started, it is our first money, the family money, and then institutions. Why institution? Because, of course, again, I have to say, Africa is very different. We cannot say Africa, because Africa is not one country. Africa is more than 50 countries. So every country has its own legislation, culture, everything. We started to become big. It was, of course, through banks and corporate. It's not an individual venture. It's not Manal going to the bank. It was a company going to the bank. And yes, on the company, on the bank, there was a board of directors. And in the board of directors, there are men, influential men or names. In order, when you start, either they cannot look to their balance sheet when you're starting up, but they can look to the capital, because it's in some countries, when you start a company, you have to put in capital, and the capital has to be relaxing the banks anyway. But things have changed a lot in Africa, and the investment in Africa, be it for men and women, it is very lucrative. Agriculture is a very important matter, especially regarding the investment and the women to invest in Africa, in the agribusiness, and the women to be also receiving of investment. I think it's something very important that we all need to focus on, because Africa is rural, and we have 60% working in agriculture. 90% of them are women.
All right, well, thank you so much. Patricia, please.
Well, good afternoon, and thank you to the organizers and Her Excellency for the opportunity to be able to listen to her words of encouragement. I feel a bit out of place, because it looks like they are all financiers, and I'm on the other side. So they are the givers, and I'm on the receiving end. So I debuted my career as a trader, but then I thought trading alone was not fulfilling, and also with the desire to be able to contribute to national development by adding value to our raw materials, I set up a cocoa processing plant in Ghana. And also, it's a perfect fit to the strategy of adding more value to our agricultural crops. So we are in Takoradi, Ghana. We process cocoa beans into cocoa liquor or mass, cocoa butter, cocoa cake, natural or alkalized. We realized the strategic importance to add more value to the technical setup from the onset. So our investment was significant across the process line to give more leverage to be able to permit the international market, because you know it's a sector dominated by multinationals, and breaking through is challenging. So we had to make sure that we could give the buyers the assurance they needed, being origin, so to speak. So we believe our investment was therefore the largest single non-governmental, totally Ghanaian corporate at that time, and a perfect fit to our strategy.
Thank you so much. Asatou, please. Alors, vous avez la traduction? Je crois que...
Désolée. Mes hommages à son Excellence, mes hommages aux organisatrices de ce forum qui nous a permis d'avoir ce panel pour pouvoir expliquer ce que nous essayons de faire. Je suis Asatou Ouedraogo, je viens du Burkina Faso. D'abord, j'ai commencé par animatrice dans un projet danois. Et après les 3 années passées comme animatrice, je suis allée au ministère de l'Information. Du ministère de l'Information, j'ai fait 6 mois parce que je ne me retrouvais pas de l'animatrice dans un bureau. Ben, j'ai dit, écoute, je vais sortir, je vais aller faire autre boulot. Donc, je suis allée encadrer une association qui était dans le beurre de karité, dont nous exportons vers la France, à l'Occitane, en Provence. Donc, c'est suite à ça que j'ai créé Global Business Company. Depuis 2007, je faisais le karité, je faisais l'exportation du karité, anacarde, le maïs. Actuellement, je suis dans l'entrepreneuriat, je suis dans l'engrais, je suis dans tout ce qui est produits chimiques. Disons, la ville de Ouagadougou, ce sont mes produits qu'on traite l'eau par la grande surface du Burkina Faso. C'est moi qui fournis les produits chimiques, les compteurs d'eau, les bancs d'essai pour les compteurs d'eau, les compteurs d'électricité. Je suis dans tout ce qui est héliport. Héliport, ça veut dire que c'est les aires d'atterrissage des hélicoptères. J'ai fait ça avec l'armée du Burkina. Je suis également présidente de beaucoup d'associations. Je suis chargée de mission à la Chambre de commerce depuis 10 ans. J'ai été élue 30e sur les top 100 des femmes du Burkina lors de l'anniversaire de la Chambre de commerce. Je m'excuse, je n'ai pas l'habitude de parler au micro, mais j'essaye de faire ce que je peux. Donc, voilà. Merci. Je voudrais ajouter aussi, Madame la Présidente, vous êtes notre inspiration. Donc, merci. Et merci à Madame Oura et sa patronne. Merci. Je vous remercie, vous toutes.
Merci beaucoup. You know, one of the things that we've talked about with access to financing is so often a woman is coming into an office and seeing a man who is there. Now, of course, Swazi, that is not true when they come to see you. and the African Development Bank has really done well in promoting a lot of women. And I'm wondering how much, first of all, how much does that come from leadership at the top? President Adesina has been very vocal about can't fly a plane with one wing, right? But also, how does it change having you there for women coming in?
No, thank you very much. And, you know, I am such an admirer of women that go out, take the risks, you know, and succeed. And it's, you know, this is what, as the African Development Bank, we wake up to do every day. So it's a real pleasure being here today. So I think that, you know, from the very beginning, the president of the African Development Bank, as you quote him famously, saying that no bird can fly with one wing. And it's not a slogan, It's not something that he says, to be pithy. He understands that Africa cannot literally fly with one wing. 50% of the population of the continent are women. Nearly 50% of the SMEs in Africa are run by women. And women are the ones that ensure that we prepare for our future. They're the ones that think about these things because they're the ones that ensure that young people are educated. So it really is at the heart of what we do at the African Development Bank. And we've done it in many different ways. So internally, it's not just me now that you need to find so you can speak to women. But there's now a number of women, including the senior director of the Africa Investment Forum, Chinelo, but also 3 of our 5 regional directors are actually women. 50% are women. We've got 3 vice presidents who are women. I mean, this is unprecedented as far as I know at the African Development Bank. And I mean, all of this happened, during President Adesina's leadership. And it's important that, we understand that it's not a slogan, he really means it. But in addition to this, it's also externally with the programs that we've put in place for women. The Affirmative Finance Action for Women in Africa is a very important initiative. We hope to raise $5 billion all told once everything is done. We've already mobilized $800 million for women in 24 countries in Africa. Wow. We mean business.
That's fantastic. Well, and the thing of representation and seeing women in these positions, it changes things so quickly. I always remember Mary Robinson, who was followed by another woman president, and then she said, a little boy came up to her and said, "Can a boy ever grow up to be president?" So it can change quickly.
Yep.
So, Raja, you are on the other side of that, coming in, invariably seeing a man, except for when you came to AIF, because you got your first funding here, right?
Yeah. Basically, maybe a bit of, I'm on both sides. I'm a project developer, but I decided that if I didn't put my own money in, my project would not be developed. So my story is more of, I want to talk about it a little bit from the investment side. My thinking was, there's business solutions and there's sort of public policy solutions for public goods and private products. So in my thinking was, if I'm going to start this business, what are some public goods that we can provide some solutions to that will bring in private investment and private goods? So surprisingly, I picked infrastructure, and as you know, these are large ticket items, and we're doing the East Africa Communities Energy Company, which is going to be adding value to the resources found on Lake Albert, given that the shortage of it is. So in 2017 or 2018, our company was, at that time we were very small. We were one of 40 global consortiums that put in a solution in the public procurement that was happening, which was seeking a private sector equity partner. And so everybody told me, you're competing with global public companies. What do you think your solution's going to look like compared to them? They've spent a lot of time on it. And I said, well, I have an advantage. I worked in the public sector. So sitting on the other side of it, maybe my solution can combine the public goods aligning with private returns. And so that's the proposal we submitted, and we're selected to be the joint equity venture of the East African community and the government. I say this because the vision existed in East Africa. We were just providing a solution to execute it, and we brought the management and technology capacity to execute it. So on 2019, at the first Africa Investment Forum, Chinelo and President Adesina, President Admasu, Tadessa of the TDB, and Samaila Zaburu from AFC. So I went knocking saying, where's the best place I can come to without going to New York or London? And they would actually believe in the solution and believe that it's worth investing their own money inside Africa. So I was kind of strategic in picking African partners first before I went to Western partners, because otherwise you have to explain where Zimbabwe is sometimes. And so my first 40 million in 2019 was because this forum provided that opportunity for us to launch this project. So I'm very grateful, and anything I can do in the next few years when our projects give us revenue, we're going to be back here very shortly to invest in other women because we benefited from it.
And that is exactly what it takes, is women then turning around and doing it for others. And you know, your story always reminds me, I often wonder when somebody gets ahead in something that is extremely challenging, were they smarter than everybody else, or were they just a little bit more anarchistic, where they didn't listen to the power structures and said, still, I can do it? And knowing you, I know you're a bit of both. So.
I just think that people are not used to women taking risks. And so I think if we don't take risks and think of this as an investment in business, my job is to make money for my investors and the government to have impact. So that's where we aligned. And I think as the rest of the women have spoken here, you just have to get up every day and show up. And I've been doing it for 4 years, and I think I've aged 10 years. But nobody expects me to show up. I think showing up was 99% of my success.
Yes, exactly. Manny, we had a very interesting discussion before coming here, and you were talking about how you can't just look at Africa as a continent, and you know, this is always sort of the balancing act of seeing the individual aspects of each country, and yet also being able to have the power of Africa, like the AFCFTA and other things like that. But what was interesting to me was when you talked about Egypt and how sophisticated it is in banking and women, and you were saying about you had the vote long before others in Egypt. So tell us about the situation in Egypt, and particularly how that has worked for getting women access to financing.
Right. I mean, as you rightfully said, we discussed that Africa is not one country. Africa is more than 50 countries, and every country has its own legislation and culture. North Africa is different in a lot of sense in the institution and the banking system. But yet, there is, of course, definitely a lot of parallel economy where women and men are not in the financial aspect. In Egypt, if I can say so, but I also know very well other countries in Africa, the problem is that it's much easier to get, of course, finance when you are a corporate, when you have a company. I think we are always mixing between having finance as a corporate, as a company. A corporate doesn't have to be a big corporate. Just have papers. And in Egypt and in other countries, when you have your papers right, things are easier. Why? Because in most of the cases, when you want to make a company, you have to be at least 2 people. So the 2 people, and you have to have at least a little bit of capital to start with. Because you have also to differentiate what type of women are we talking about. You're talking about the woman entrepreneur sitting here, or you're talking about the women that we are trying to pull in the financial system, because this is, when we say that in Africa, there is a financial gap. When we say that in Africa, women are working, but they are not in the system. If we say, again, in sub-Saharan Africa, if women have finance, you have $92 billion that could be lost in productivity. So Egypt or South Africa or any place where there is institution, women are have access to finance because they have been in the system of having the vehicles to be able to have the finance. As an individual going alone, you will not have the finance. You need to have a structure so you can have accounting, you can have balance sheet. And I think what we're trying to do is to pull a lot of the women. And why a lot of the women? I wish we had in the panel men with us. Why? No, really, because I think if men are not supporting women as an equal partner, things will be distorted. I think it's a partnership, men and women, and we need just to give more chances to the women, because sometimes women are self-isolated themselves because they fear when you need to have a guarantee. Like for instance, in Egypt or everywhere, the guarantee comes from a board of director, well, let's see the man, or they tell you, okay, if you have a sole, how do I say, just a company where you are only you, they can tell you, we need a guarantor. I mean, the guarantor can be your father, and even if you're 30 years old, father, a husband, they need to see the man. Why? Because the collateral that you're going to be putting, if it's going to be an asset, they need to make sure that this asset is either yours or somebody else, because they need a collateral. And I think what we need to discuss always here is that if you want to pull women, we need to find another type of financing for them. What are the collateral requested? How we can educate the women, the literacy in the financial. I mean, because they are scared, they don't know what to do. Because in the parallel market, in the parallel economy in Egypt, is huge. Women are working, of course, they have access to finance, yes, but what finance? The microfinance, where they make people poor and poor. The microfinance, where you cannot even have a data. Why? Bank will not make microfinance and gradually have it in the system. So Egypt and other countries, we have all the mixture. You have women in institution, but women who has companies, who have paper. You need to have some documents, traceable, bankable, to have bankable finance. So this is to answer your question.
Thank you so much. You know, this gap, the financing gap, it is pretty significant and really disturbing to see. Patricia, I'd love to come to you and just see your thoughts on where that gap, where should we be looking to see that gap, to address that gap? Is it in government? Is it the private sector? Is it the multilateral institutions? Where should we be looking to see that? Who do you sort of hold responsible?
As a backdrop to examining the key issues, which is access to finance, allow me to share my story with you. I earlier on said how I got into cocoa processing. In less than 2 years after we had set up, we, if I may describe it as a local, were able to secure our position as the first in the food processing space to attain the highest food certification standard at that time, ISO 22000 in 2011. We later on raised our certification profile into FSSC 22000 and BRCA, currently the highest certification. Later, in line with our horizontal integration, Plot ESA in Cote d'Ivoire acquired another plant, a co-processing plant, starting on focus on the production of cocoa liquor here in Abidjan. Her Excellency and distinguished participants, I'm sharing my story, the Plot experience, for an obvious reason. One would think that having made great strides in such a competitive and challenging environment, and having stood toe-to-toe with multinationals, our case for financing would have been met favorably. But unfortunately, that hasn't been the case. to bring plot to where we are today has by no means been smooth. And we have had to struggle to keep afloat, not because of technical or marketing know-how, but purely for adequate funding. For example, the Côte d'Ivoire facility, even before we had completed the test runs, we were able to secure 4,000 tons of contract from a first-class off-taker. So you see, it's not the technical or the marketing, but then lack of, I use the word adequate funding, because if I need so much and you give me so little, the impact won't be felt. From the introductory statements and all, it's clear. I mean, it's been affirmed that funding is the lifeblood of any organization, and more so for a manufacturing concern, where your throughput, which is the plant capacity utilization, is the key to profitability. If you run a plant at 30% against 80%, it makes a difference, a huge difference to the bottom line. So to be able to increase profitability, you'd have to increase the plant capacity utilization. And that means more raw materials, and that brings us back to the question of importance of funding. I always say adequate funding because, and especially in our sector where 80% of our cost of production is linked to a commodity traded on the London and New York's futures market. Cocoa prices are known to be very volatile. And so not only do we need funding, we need related things like the financial tools to manage the volatility driven by the market. So it's, you realize that you're fighting so many battles. There's the cost of finance, which on our continent is high. Coming to my sector, because I talk about my sector because that's what I know, our main competitors are the multinationals, and their financing cost is less than half of what we pay. Yeah. So that, from the onset, puts us at a disadvantage, in addition to other disadvantages like market accessibility and all that. I mean, in fairness, the multinationals have been the traditional suppliers to the chocolate industry for decades. So breaking through the monopoly is daunting. And we are in a sector where the buyers, they buy forward. They buy 12, 24 months ahead. And they want the assurance of the financial capability of the supplier, which the multinationals can give them. And that brings us to the unavoidable issue of financing. So I think, governmental and institutional should, it's not just DFS, I think it's the whole lot. There could be, for example, 12 years after we started, to date, I am the only woman on the African continent in large-scale cocoa processing.
Wow. And what percentage of cocoa in the world comes from Africa?
About,
yeah.
The whole Africa, close to 80%. Ghana and Côte d'Ivoire accounts for about 67%. If you add Cameroon and Nigeria, you're grossing 80%. Yeah. But then I did share our story, our accomplishments and our frustrations for lack of adequate funding. So to what end would somebody come to join if there are so many twists and turns unfavorable to sustaining the business and grow in it.
You know, Patricia, as you're talking, I'm thinking next Valentine's Day, when all the men are thinking about giving chocolates to the women that they're in love with, I think we should say, no, you should be supporting the only woman CEO of a cocoa company. That's your Valentine's Day present. So, Asatu, you know, we're talking about the funding gap and the different, you know, levels of what their obligation should be. But the other is, how should women be supporting the financing of other women? It's not our obligation to do it. Everyone should do it, not just women, but if we don't, no one will. So what is the obligation? What should women be doing to finance other women? How should you be a champion?
Merci. En ce qui concerne le financement des femmes, c'est vraiment un problème. Parce que même si tu veux aider d'autres femmes à avoir accédé à des financements, c'est peut-être de 50 000 à 1 million. Parce que les banques classiques, il faut avoir des garanties. Et les PMI, les microfinances, il faut avoir au moins une moto pour pouvoir donner la carte grise de ta moto, ou du moins se faire avaliser par quelqu'un qui peut avoir des garanties. C'est tout un problème. Même nous qui avons des chiffres d'affaires de 3 à 4 à 100 millions d'euros par an, on a des difficultés pour pouvoir avoir des financements parce que quand tu prends un marché de 12 milliards et la banque va te demander de donner une garantie de 15 milliards. Et comment tu vas faire pour avoir une garantie de 15 milliards pour pouvoir exécuter ton marché de 12 milliards? Donc les banques, surtout en Afrique, c'est très, très, très difficile. Ce que moi j'allais suggérer à la BAD et à tous ceux qui sont présents dans la salle, c'est de créer un couloir, peut-être, en tout cas quelque chose pour pouvoir supporter, aider les femmes. Actuellement, j'ai un contrat d'engrais, plus de 30 000 tonnes à livrer dans mon pays. Et on me demande, il faut un bateau qui va dans les 40 000 tonnes, alors que pour avoir une ligne de crédit, un LC, avec la banque, une seule entreprise ne peut pas avoir plus de 10 milliards. Donc, il faut le faire par revolving. Avec les fournisseurs, ce n'est pas évident. Actuellement, je fais des stocks de produits chimiques pour le traitement d'eau au Burkina. J'avoue que quand tu fais venir 50 conteneurs par un seul convoi, c'est tout un problème. D'abord, le prix, la banque. Il y a beaucoup de choses qui compliquent la tâche. Et pourtant, c'est une activité que c'est passionnant. J'aime bien le faire parce que quand on dit que c'est telle dame qui fait le traitement d'eau pour la population, c'est une fierté. Donc du coup, pour avoir le financement, c'est tout un problème. Pour faire venir le produit avec MSC, Bolloré, c'est tout un problème. Ça veut dire que tout est compliqué avec les femmes. Tout est compliqué. Mais avec son excellence présente ici, avec la BAD ici présente, j'espère qu'à la sortie de ce forum, d'ici le 5 ou le 7, on aura les solutions pour nous. Je vous remercie.
I think you might want to respond.
I think, you know, when I hear these stories, sometimes we can, you know, we run the risk of reducing the issue of the financing gap to just money. And I think I am duty-bound to at least explain that it's more complex than that. You know, I think that earlier on, you know, Manal talked about, you know, the banking and the financial services sector in North Africa and Egypt in particular, and South Africa and a few other countries. It matters, I think, the extent to which, for instance, the regulatory framework is appropriate, right? So if women from the get-go don't even have the right to own property of any kind, you know, their husband still signs for them, you know, for things. How do you expect, you know, first of all, women, for us to even talk about putting a dent in the financing gap? So that's the first issue. And then secondly, you know, you have countries in very fragile situations, you know, sometimes we're developing an indigenous, you know, financial system in the country is very, very difficult. It's not unreasonable to, you know, for a bank which doesn't know your local circumstances to not be comfortable with lending to you. So it's very important, and we do a big part of this as the African Development Bank, working with countries, with the financial sector to actually develop the financial system, the local financial system, because it's important. But it means that there has to be a regulatory framework which supports you know, for instance, you know, collateral of all types. You know, I think banks sometimes can be unimaginative when it comes to, you know, deciding what is appropriate collateral or not. You know, so allowing women to have the right to own things without needing anyone's permission, you know, to own these things and be able to trade what they own, temporarily, for instance, to be able to raise financing to meet, you know, their ambitions. And I think it's also important that we think about how much of women's lives, you know, because I think, you know, I'm very mindful that my life is different from a woman, you know, who is trying to make a living in a rural area, you know, who has to look after children, doesn't have proper access to roads, doesn't have electricity, doesn't have clean water, doesn't have healthcare, but she's still hustling and trying to run a business in that circumstance. So I guess the point that I'm making is that, you know, it's, we should not reduce the issue of this financing gap to simply just, well, if you put money there, you know, it'll solve the problem. We need to have a regulatory framework that allows women to thrive. You know, women are not bereft of ideas. You know, it's not like they don't know, you know, a great idea when they see it, you know, but they just want an environment which allows them to actually go out and use their minds, use their God-given gifts, and their God-given talent to drive this. We come in with the necessary support. We work with governments to look at regulations, to look at how they can support, you know, women, you know, to look at how they can allow women, you know, ownership. We work with financial institutions, you know, to say to them, you know, we will give you a line of credit that will support exclusively women, and we want you to track the results of how you are using our lines of credit, you know, to make sure that we are supporting particularly small and medium enterprises. Because, you know, but of course, I think some of the issues that were raised by Patricia, for instance, are probably issues that are more higher up on the value chain. You know, and where a very well-developed financial sector, you know, with a variety of financing instruments. You know, you need to have banks, you need to have a stock exchange. It helps to have a stock exchange. Yeah. You know, in South Africa, I don't know what it's like in Egypt, but we have about 4 different stock exchanges, you know, and they are specialist stock exchanges. This is what we work with stock exchanges in Africa as the African Development Bank, to precisely do this, to say that there are a million things that we need to do actually. It's not one simple thing. You know, so I say this just to say that, you know, it's not the African Development Bank that have answers to everything, you know, because we understand, I think, more than anything, that this is a multi-dimensional problem that we are trying to address. And I think the intervention by Her Excellency was very important here, because I think she articulated the role that governments can play to support, women and women entrepreneurs and SMEs. I'll stop there. So sorry, I don't have answers.
But yet, I have to say, the African Development Bank, you may not have everything, but you've clearly set the table for this, which I think is a great thing.
It's crucial. It's important. I mean, we see it as probably the single most important thing the bank can do. Our high fives are actually designed in many ways to bring women into the economy, to make sure that economic activity is inclusive. There's lots of opportunities. I mean, Patricia's business in agriculture, if you think about it, it's agro-processing. We think this is a fantastic area of opportunity for women entrepreneurs, and we are, expending a lot of effort and energy to make sure that women are the major beneficiaries. We are funding a lot of those programs. But the point is that I think, if you need $1 billion to grow your business, because it's grown that big, it's others that need to step in. It's not us.
I think, Raja, you had something you wanted to. Both of you, please go ahead.
Okay. I just want to say I totally agree with what you said, and it's excellent. The regulatory, the framework where we can develop. Malaysia, they have done a program for literacy of women for the finance. In Africa, we don't even know one standard, what is SME, what are the SME. EU, they have done an SME, and they have. This is small, this is medium enterprise. In Africa, we don't have this one regulation, and yet we would like to trade with each other. She had her plant in Ghana, she wanted to do it in Cote d'Ivoire. We need to have one framework, and we need to bring, as you were saying, it's not only in the high up, we need to bring the women into the sector by going where they are. In Ethiopia, and I can say this, there's a program called the Agriculture Transformation. You can adapt it to the financial sector. What? You're taking gradually the people where they are, but they go to them. They go to the farmer. We need to go to the farmers and to talk to them that the microfinance, it might be okay, but let's go one step higher, and then one step higher, and then they get them into an entity where there is sustainability. Because this is, for Africa, the sustainability. It's not a one-man show or not a one-woman show, especially that women have a lot to do. And why we're talking about women, because women are 60% of the workforce, and maybe especially on my field is agribusiness, so agriculture is very important. So I think we need to go to them, we need to define what are the SMEs as an African level, and we need to do a financial transformation program to the literacy, and to make them not fear, and to see the collateral something different, at least for them to start. They can have cattle as a collateral. We're talking small, but at least not a microfinance, not $100 that become 120, because microfinance is very expensive. And it's just good to buy a chicken and then maybe to sell cheese or something like that. Or maybe to make some jam at home. And they are afraid from being in the system for the taxes, because they think if you are doing what you're doing, and there is a lot of business going there, if they go into the system, what about the taxes? So they need to be a program to make people confident, and to make people, it's okay. And even for taxes-wise, I think a bank like the African Development Bank, when we talk with the government, and when we want to encourage women, it's not just finance, as you said. It's a whole setup to try to make them feel okay that they can work, and it's okay that we go to their level and becoming bigger, and not to be afraid, because women sometimes they bear a lot of consequences. Let me tell you that when women work alone, 90% of their revenue goes to the household. Not like men. Men is about 30 to 40%, because they have other things to do. Maybe they go to play domino, or they go to play They have, I mean, but actually, you can see this is official statistics. I mean, when the women work in the parallel market, it is for their kids, it's for the home, for that. That we need to make them in the system. We need to make a transformation financial system in Africa for that.
You know, Raja, I know you had something that you wanted to add, but I also, one thing that I always hear from you is until we have control of money, we don't really have power. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the mantra my mom raised me with. If you don't have access to wealth, you're not a decision maker. And one of the reasons, and you don't control your time. And if you want to have a family and children, if you don't control your time and you don't control wealth, you know, you end up being at the bottom of the economic ladder, no matter what country you're from. And so that's kind of what I wanted to say today here. This is not, I think what Asatu was saying is not about money. She's saying the money is the path to wealth, right? And if women are not part of the wealth equation, you know, we can say, oh, you don't need money, you can be, but I started as an SME advisor in West Africa in 1993. They were talking about what we're talking about 30 years ago. So when people say, wait, we need systems, we need regulatory frameworks, we need this and you need that, you need property rights, you need this. My question is, now 30 years later, I keep thinking, wow, the message is still the same in the same way, which discourages women. You know, each time, men at least have other networks and things that they can go back into, but you get one shot at this, one shot at opening your business. And once, if the business doesn't open well, it's over. So for me, the three questions that have not gotten answered in 30 years I've been, and I'm a former US government official who was in charge of Africa at AID. We have done, US government has done extraordinary amount of investment on financial literacy, SMEs, micro. So what is it, 30 years of development institutions who have put money into regulatory frameworks, institutions, offering Grameen Bank money, all of that. Why is it that we're not seeing the results is the questions we should ask ourselves. It's not a women's problem. 30 years of investments have happened across, some of it have benefited, you can see some of it, but that accelerator has not taken place. That's one. The second issue is risk. I've never been in a field where somebody says, you have to guarantee me that 100% of my risk is covered. I'm like, even, you know, the Buddhas, the Allahs, and everybody couldn't give you life, you know, so somebody has to de-risk you, right? If I can de-risk myself, I walked into, I won't tell you which institution, I walked into a financial institution and I was able to, prepared all my documentation and I said, here's 80%, I've de-risked you 80%. Well, like, who's gonna de-risk me the other 20%? I was like, well, you know, God? I don't know. You know, you don't have answers to it. So for me, that de-risking is where this should happen. Where women need support is de-risking, because we're considered a higher risk. It's, you know, like a teenage son is a higher risk at 22 with a fast car. I'm apparently in the same category as the 22-year-old looking for car insurance. The risk is perceived. I don't want to say, I see it as a perceived risk. So for me, I have enough experience on the continent for 30 years to say the topics have not changed, but the instruments required to advance and accelerate women entrepreneurship is really lacking. And I haven't figured out, I mean, I'm going to make a pitch here today. From now to next, when we're back here at the Africa Investment Forum next November, what is the amount of capital or the amount of instruments can this group of institutions commit to de-risk women entrepreneurs at whatever scale, right? So that's at the end of this, whoever is at the last ceremony, closing ceremony, please ask that question. But anyway, for me, it's a struggle having seen the amount, and Shazia is right. They've made investments, but I'm in the market now to raise 2 billion in debt, 1 billion in equity, for an African government to see its investments in energy move forward. So it's not my company, it's the continent that needs it. And so anybody else can call me after this, but this is where we're struggling, the de-risking and why those investments have not realized to companies like, why don't we have categories for SMEs, higher level things, and anybody can come in there. So for me, that's the challenge, that we've been talking about this for 30 years, and it's all about wealth and women being participants in the wealth sharing.
Yes. Sasitu, your comment has created all of this.
Yeah, because I do want to challenge us a little bit, on this, because, if you have a great business, okay, but you operate in an environment, okay,
Absolutely.
where there is, there are oligopolies, where there are
Political
monopolies, where the logistics chains are owned by somebody, or the value chain. There's no amount of money that's going to fix that.
Absolutely.
Those are policy interventions. Yeah. And that's why I want to say that we really need to think about this, because you're right. How can we be asking the same question 30 years later? Yeah. It's got to be because of maybe we are not talking about these other things, which turn out to be just as important. And I think, I hope the continental free trade area is an opportunity, actually, to try and once and for all address these questions about, do we want certain sectors in our economies continue to be dominated by organizations, sometimes not even of African origin, and that therefore make it very, very difficult. Because if you're a bank and somebody that's coming to you is a smaller player in that area, it's a legitimate question to say, do I have the risk appetite, for somebody that's going to struggle to break through this monopolistic situation? So I think these are the issues that we need to think more and more about. Thank you.
This reminds me so much of how we talk so much about the need for funding for infrastructure. Yeah. And then it finally came out, there's plenty of money. The problem is there aren't bankable deals. Yeah. But it's a lot, all that goes into making a bankable deal. So
and a deal does show up.
Yeah.
And then what happens?
Yeah. But that it isn't just the lack of financing. It's all the ecosystem around it. I really wish that we had time to go into all of that, because there's a lot to be able to cover. But I have been given the signal that there is time. It's such a shame, because I was going to take questions from the audience and especially insist on a few questions from men, so that the men would have to be asking women. But I've been told that we are out of time, and so we do need to wrap up, unfortunately. So before we wrap up, what I'd like to do is just go down and have each of you say, we're talking about women as champions of investment. So all of you, powerful women who have the ability to make change, what is the commitment that each of you want to make before the next AIF, before next year, that hopefully we'll have this again and we can hold them to it, right, Chinelo? So,
wait, you're asking us to make a commitment?
Yeah. What is going to be your commitment over the next year to be championing women and investment in women?
I feel like I might end up in trouble, but
I
but
say
I
no
really,
pressure, but I mean pressure.
Yeah. But I think it's good for us to hear from women. Because, sometimes we can be very, I guess, traditional in our approach to developing instruments and solutions. So, I hope, and Chinelo is here, that we can really do something special around AFAWA at the next AIF. Really take this to the next level for women, by women. That's my objective.
And that's not letting the men off the hook. The commitment we've made as a company, and it's a principle we work with, is in our projects, there's a lot of local content. One of the things we found is in the contracts that we're giving out, what percentage of our company's contracts that we are giving out over the next year, how much of that can be national content, how much of the contracts can go to national companies and women-owned national companies. So we're targeting somewhere between 15 to 20% to start off, because it's the first time we're doing it. It's the first investment we're making in the region. So that's, and then second is we're insisting at any international partner that we've come on, they bring in either women advisors or women service providers along with them in order to benefit from our procurement process in these projects that we've developed.
That's fabulous.
Well, what we're doing now, and we're starting from actually the beginning of the year, is we're building a center of excellence in various countries where we would like to operate more for the processing. And the center of excellence, our main focus will be on women, that we give them more training, and we is to establish with them contract farming. So actually, the center of excellence will be to train them with new technologies and give them the finance and to buy back their product. And we, this is not in only one country. This is the commitment we're having for Africa, for the agribusiness, and for the women who are actually working on the farming, most of them.
Fantastic, thank you. Patricia.
In terms of commitment, I would say not much would depend on me. But then on my part, I am available for any dialogue, because I think that is what is missing. There needs to be in-depth engagement with us to find workable solutions, to find tailor-made solutions. We've talked a lot about framework regulations and all, but one size does not fit all. I hate to say that we have to think out of the box, but we need to work together, and we need to rather increase the size of the box so that we can have workable solutions for the peculiarity of the challenges we come across.
Fantastic, thank you. Asitu.
Déjà, j'ai 300 femmes, dont gérées par moi. Je suis la présidente d'une coopérative de 300 femmes dans l'agriculture. Je pense que d'ici l'année prochaine, je vais m'engager à coopter peut-être à plus de 500 femmes, en demandant aussi aux banques de diminuer le taux d'intérêt, parce que nous sommes à 12,5 actuellement. Si les banquiers sont dans la salle, je suis sûre qu'ils sont dans la salle. Ça, c'est une suggestion, c'est une demande à la vice-présidente de la BAD aussi, de plaider pour nous les femmes. Donc, sur ce, je pense que le forum prochain, on trouvera des solutions pour les femmes. Et vous êtes notre solution, Excellence. Je m'adresse à son Excellence. Vous êtes notre solution. Nous, les femmes, nous comptons sur vous. Je vous remercie.
Well, and I do believe these are all being recorded, so we can come back to you next year and ask everyone, have you fulfilled your commitments? So,
Thank you,
well,
Carol.
with that, it's unfortunate that, you know, there's never enough time when you have such amazing panelists, and it's such a shame. You know, I leave both happy at having heard all of this, and also disappointed that, oh, I had so many more questions, so many more things to discuss. But I want to thank each of you. It has really been wonderful having you on the panel. Thank you so much for just all of your thoughts and inspiration. So, and I also, again, Your Excellency, thank you for coming and giving such inspiring words to all of us. What? We will, yes. And I also just want to say how wonderful it is that AIF has really taken the lead on this, and that Chinelo and her team has really championed this. And it's just a fantastic thing to see. I think, Raja, you were asking, we want to know how many deals with women are going to be here next year. So, Chinelo, that will be the challenge we all want with AIF. But with that, thank you so much. It's really been a pleasure. Thank you.